Hey friends, Allison Ramirez here, Christian author, editor, and content creator, here to talk to you today about my top 3 tips for Christian fiction writers. I've been super excited about this video for some time, and I hope that if you are someone who has written a Christian fiction book or is currently writing one or wants to write one, that one or more of these 3 tips that I'm going to share today you find helpful or meaningful to you in that process. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Okay, so specifically when I say Christian fiction, I mean any sort of genre that is addressing things that are not presently real, right? So this can be, I know for me, I'm currently working on a Christian dystopian novel, which means I'm working on a book where the society is not the society as we know it today, but more of a futuristic society and different ideas on what that might look like in government and laws and that sort of thing. There's also just generic Christian fiction, right? Maybe you're writing about like real things that can actually happen in the real world, but they haven't actually happened. You know, maybe you're writing like romance, or you're maybe writing like historical fiction. I've read a couple really good medieval Christian fiction books recently. You might be also tackling Christian fantasy, which means you're actually writing a make-believe fake world. Maybe you have, you know, wizards and magic and spells and that sort of thing, but you're trying to incorporate a Christian-esque sense of the world or different Christian themes, for example, maybe like Chronicles of Narnia, right? You also might be like a short story writer, writing like novellas. You might be writing like a shorter story, but you still want to have Christian themes within your story. And so, or maybe you're a mystery or horror fiction writer, no matter what your genre, you're writing a fiction book and you're writing with kind of a Christian lens in mind. But specifically, I want to break down my top 3 tips because though I am still rather new as a Christian fiction writer, there are 3 really key points to keep in mind when you're on this journey that I am working to incorporate into my own writing and I think are really valuable. And the first is to always remember story over sermon. And what I mean by this is when we're writing a book, when a reader picks up our book, they want a compelling story. They want to be drawn into the characters. They want to be drawn into the setting and the world and the struggles of the characters. They want a really captivating story. And sometimes, you know, which isn't necessarily a bad mentality, but as Christian writers, we want people to come to know about Jesus. We want people to come to know about the Christian faith. And so what can sometimes happen is that our story that we're writing becomes less about the story itself and more about just preaching a sermon, right? More about just, you know, throwing in Bible verses, throwing in catechism references, trying to have the reader come away from your book having, you know, a new renowned understanding and sense of the Christian faith, and they're on fire for the faith now, and they, you know, they just know so much about it. And I think that this is a good inherent desire, right? We want our writing to draw other people to Christ. We believe that, you know, the Holy Spirit is working through our writing and has placed upon our hearts the desire to write. But I think it's really important that we don't lose sight of the fact that faith, even, you know, in and of itself, is a journey, is a struggle. It's not always going to be cookie cutter picture perfect where our character is a bad boy and by the end he's, you know, brilliant and has found the Lord and, you know, his life is amazing, right? And so it can be really hard to do this. I know when I was younger, when I was actually in middle school, I started writing a kind of contemporary coming of age book, and I was really coming into my faith at the time, and so the story had a lot of references, direct references to God, direct references to faith, and looking back on that story, I realized that I think it was a little bit preachy, like it was a little bit much just like making the faith very, you know, like cookie cutter and like all the beliefs will line up perfectly in your life and, you know, you'll never have any doubts or any questions. But I think it's important to really produce a captivating story that takes your readers on a journey with the characters and has faith interwoven within, but not so much a way where it's just right there bluntly in their face, but still has those threads and themes. Now you might be wondering, okay, well, how do I actually do that? How do I actually avoid, you know, just like preaching a sermon, having my story just be one big sermon, right? That leads into my second tip, which is to have transformative characters. This is, I think, the most powerful stories you read are the ones where the characters, they are not the same as when they began the story, right? They have some sort of internal struggle, they have some sort of external struggle, you know, with another antagonist character that's stopping them from achieving their goals, but the idea is that they are no longer who they once were by the end of the story. And when we think about our Christian life, that's very much the same, right? We think about our life before Christ, or our life when we weren't actively pursuing Christ, and our life after. Hopefully, we're radically different people, but in a good way. And so we want that to reflect in our characters' lives. Not so much in the sense of they, you know, didn't know God, and then by the end they know God and now their life's great, but showing them working through real human problems, you know, suffering, loss, you know, betrayal, rejection, these harder issues, and not necessarily showing that faith solves all their problems, right? But that faith is helping them along their journey, you know, even if it's not in obvious ways. Currently, I don't want to give too much away about my current book, but my character struggles with feeling like she isn't seen by those in her life. She feels like, you know, her parents and those around her don't value her and don't see her for who she really is, and that she's not able to share her ideas and pursue her goals in life with the support of those around her. And so that's where she starts off, and then by the end of the story, I'm trying to show her feeling seen and feeling valued, not only by those in her life, but ultimately by God. And so that's not giving too much away, but you can see, you know, that's a big journey that we can go on, right? Feeling like we're not seen or valued, and how do we work through that? How do we overcome that, right? And perhaps find our truest fulfillment in the Lord and in our faith, without making that seem, you know, too obvious, and without making it too like, well, now she fits in all the time, and now she, you know, she just feels seen and valued all the time. And that's not necessarily how the story is going to end, but it's showing a transformation that the readers can relate with, and that the readers can read and see, I feel like I'm this character, or I feel like I'm these other characters that are helping the main protagonist, right? You want your readers to resonate with your characters and see them changing and see them growing, because that's something that they can relate to in their own lives. Okay, my third tip is ignite the imagination. And what I mean by this is, in books, we don't always want to just entertain or inform our readers, but we want to actually invite them to imagine themselves in the story, and invite them to think about life in new ways, perhaps ways that they had never even considered before. And I like to think about the influence of the Holy Spirit when I think about igniting the imagination, right? We want to have the Spirit, you know, move positively in the lives of your readers, even if they might not even realize it, by maybe, you know, motivating them, inspiring them, giving them, you know, a new sense of how a world might look, with a sense of faith, right? But not like pushing it on them, but we want to have their imagination be ignited, and to be feeling inspired by your story, inspired that there's something, you know, more going on, maybe perhaps in their life than they would have thought. And so a couple examples I wanted to share, right, is, you know, with your characters, in order to ignite the imagination, you might show your readers how a character is working through a vice and turning it into a virtue, or how they're demonstrating trust and humility in the faces of hard circumstances. How do they come to treat, you know, other characters and treat and view themselves within the story, to make this transformation more believable as you go along. But you don't want to just spit out principles, you don't want to just spit out Bible verses, or, you know, like these overarching, you know, themes that will just kind of like make your reader go, oh, but is it really that easy? Is it really that simple, right? Because even for those of us who feel deeply, you know, connected to God, or feel deeply empowered by our faith, and we want to grow, you know, in our knowledge of Jesus, it's not always going to look pretty in our lives. It's not going to always be easy. And there's going to be times when we have doubts, and when we have questions, and we're confused. And so we want our readers to go through that too. And we want our readers to be perhaps asking those same questions and having those same challenges and doubts that maybe we face, or we know other people in our life to face, so that it seems like a realistic story of Jesus, right? Of God working in the trenches of all of our messiness of life, right? So, you know, having that cookie cutter wrap up story doesn't necessarily reflect the trueness of the human existence. And that's what we want our stories to do. We want our stories to authentically and honestly show, you know, the real world, but with a good God working within that world, right? And so finally, I wanted to just show you this artwork piece. I found this at a kind of a farmer's market a couple years back, and I really resonated with this because I'm not one to just pick up any artwork, but I love that it's in a forest. And I will say the very first book, the book I mentioned earlier that I wrote in middle school that was like a contemporary coming of age book, had a forest as a big theme. And so you can see that there's a lot of dark tones, right? There's the darkness of the trees, there's the darkness of the path, of the ground. But you can see that there's light in the middle, and there's light even brighter at the end, and there's even kind of some greens and some reds. And so you can't see exactly what's at the end. You know that there's light at the end, but you can't quite see it. You don't even necessarily know how the path is gonna fully get you there. And there's darkness all around your path toward the light. And so to me, you can follow along with my metaphor here, or just disregard it if you think it's bad, but it's been helpful to me to think about this artwork as my journey of writing a book and writing a story from the Christian lens, right? I acknowledge the darkness on all sides. I acknowledge the darkness on the path, but I am always helping my characters work towards the light, right? Work towards goodness and love and virtue and truth that we find in our faith. But sometimes there's reds and greens, you know, there's kind of the, I guess, not really dark or light, but just the middle points of our journey where we have setbacks, but we're striving towards the good even amidst the darkness that is around us. So I really like this artwork, and it was cool because I actually got to meet the artist of the artwork. But when I am sitting down to work on my current Christian dystopian novel, and I think hopefully any of my books, I always look at this artwork and I kind of just say a prayer before I start writing. You know, and I just ask God, like, show me how I can show your light through the darkness of the life of my characters and the darkness of the world that they're facing in a way that ignites the imagination of my readers and transforms my characters and produces a story that is very compelling, right? It is very powerful in the minds of readers, even without explicitly making it feel like it's a Christian or a faith story. Okay, on a final note, I also wanted to add the point that Jesus himself often spoke in parables, right? And parables are stories that he would tell his followers and his apostles and those gathered around him. And if someone asked him a question, he wouldn't always just give a very straightforward and obvious answer, right? For example, the Good Samaritan story, right? If someone said, how am I to treat my neighbor? He could have just said, you know, take care of your neighbor when they're hurt and when they're in a time of stress or difficulty. But instead, he shared a story of this, you know, man who is robbed on the roadside, and 3 different men pass him by, right? There's like the priest, and then there's some other person who's supposed to be helpful, and then there's the Good Samaritan, right? Who is the one that's kind of the enemy town, or the one that, you know, this man wouldn't think would be helping him, ends up helping him, right? And, you know, Jesus's other parables, like the parable of the sower, when the parable is going and throwing seed on all sorts of ground, the rocky and the dry ground and the good ground, and, you know, different seeds come up or get taken away depending on the ground that they're sown in, right? To kind of symbolize how, you know, we don't want to be someone that's, you know, a seed on a rocky ground where, you know, we just kind of fall away when hard times come, or, you know, the birds come and take the seeds off the ground. You know, we don't want to get plucked away by the temptations of the world or choked out by weeds. La-da-da-da-da, right? The idea is that, you know, Jesus told stories. He was a storyteller. And that was a big way that he shared his truth and his teaching to those around him. And sometimes the parables, you know, got through, and a lot of times the people that heard them were very confused. And, but that was what Jesus used, right? He wanted to use the art and the beauty of storytelling to reach his people, right? And so that's, to me, is a motivation for me to tell stories, right? And have messages and themes within those stories that might not at surface level seem obvious, but when you dig deeper and when you really reflect on the elements of the story, you can see the deeper truths coming through, right? Hopefully one or more of these tips were helpful to you. I hope to kind of flesh out Christian fiction a little bit more in future videos. This is just my first go at it. But if you liked this video, please like and subscribe and comment below. I'd love to hear from you in the comments and kind of get to know you on a more personal relationship as we journey together on this faith of being Christian fiction writers. So thank you for tuning in today, and I wish you a blessed week ahead in your writing and in life. Take care. God bless.